Welcome. Today we are opening the metaphorical doors of Shermer High School on Saturday, March 24, 1984.
That very specific date.
It is.
That-
And we're not here to just watch 5 students serve an 8-hour detention. We're here to serve a kind of sentence of analysis ourselves.
That's a good way to put it.
To explore why this one specific cinematic moment became, such a permanent cultural fixture.
Yeah, that's really the right approach.
Yeah.
Our source material today is all about the John Hughes film, The Breakfast Club. And our mission, like you said, is not to summarize the plot.
Right.
I mean, we all know the brain, the athlete, the basket case, the princess, and the criminal eventually bond. Our goal is to understand the historical bedrock, the really high-stakes creative decisions,
And the cultural weight.
and the immense cultural weight this low-budget project carried, and, continues to carry, even 4 decades later.
We're really examining the blueprints of an icon here. This is a film, you have to remember, that the Library of Congress recognized.
In 2016, yes.
In 2016, they called it culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. It was selected for the U.S. National Film Registry. That's a huge declaration.
It is.
It places it in a very specific echelon of American cinema. It's not just seen as entertainment, but as a genuine document of its time.
And that status isn't given lightly.
Yeah.
It reflects how effectively John Hughes managed to distill these, universal anxieties of being a teenager into one single claustrophobic setting.
The library.
The library of Shermer High School. So we're looking beyond the specific actions of the characters to the broader pressures they represented and how those representations influenced, everything that came after it in the teen film genre. It's established a whole new template.
A template for emotional honesty.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this creation story because it sounds like John Hughes was just operating on pure creative overdrive in the mid-'80s. He was like crafting a genre almost entirely by himself.
He absolutely was. It was a creative frenzy. The pace he was working at is, frankly, astounding. Hughes wrote the script for The Breakfast Club around the same time he was writing 16 Candles.
In 1984.
Right. And what's interesting is the order of things. He originally saw Breakfast Club as his directorial debut. It was a project he felt was, critically important and deeply personal to him.
But the studio had other ideas.
Precisely. The speed at which he finished the 16 Candles script, it impressed the studio executives so much that they chose that film to be his first directing job instead.
So 16 Candles sort of became the warm-up act.
The proving ground, yeah. Which you could argue prepared him for the more psychologically intense, dialogue-driven nature of The Breakfast Club.
And the title itself, it's a neat little story that kind of helps define the film's tone. The first working title was much less evocative.
It was. It was initially titled The Lunch Bunch.
The Lunch Bunch, it just doesn't land the same way.
Not at all. The final title came directly from a friend of Hughes. This friend was in a real-life detention class that was nicknamed The Breakfast Club at another school.
And that little shift from lunch to breakfast, it instantly gives the film this slightly more institutional, almost serious feel.
It hints at the length of the sentence they were serving, but also suggests a kind of exclusive morning-long meeting.
What's particularly fascinating here, and it really speaks to the confidence in Hughes' script, is just how efficient the production was. For a film that became such a massive cultural benchmark that defined the look and feel of the whole decade for teen films, it was made on a surprisingly small budget.
Just $1 million.
$1 million.
And that low budget is actually critical to understanding the film's artistic choices. It meant the film had to rely almost exclusively on dialogue, on character development, and performance.
Not on expensive sets or action sequences.
Exactly. And while Universal Pictures was involved, the sources note that because the budget was so small and Universal wasn't the main production company, the film gained this popular recognition as an independent film, even though, technically, a major studio was involved.
So the low budget was less a limitation and more of a strategic decision.
A creative constraint, really.
Right, a constraint that forced creativity. Hughes basically convinced the investors that because the setting was confined largely to one room, the risk was minimal.
And the return on that $1 million investment was extraordinary.
$51.5 million at the box office. That just speaks volumes about how universal the material was.
It was an extremely pragmatic and, brilliant move for a first-time director. In an interview from 1999, Hughes admitted that he faced a lot of skepticism.
About his ability to direct.
Yes, because he didn't have prior filmmaking experience. So by choosing this insular, one-room set and focusing on dialogue, He minimized the financial risk for his investors, which enabled him to secure the job and prove what he could do without relying on high-cost effects.
We also have a great specific detail about the actual filming location, Maine North High School in Des Plaines, Illinois.
Which was a huge logistical advantage for them.
How so?
Well, the school had closed in 1981, so they had this vacant location to use. They weren't, racing against the school bell or working around students.
That makes sense. And the sources give us this really intriguing behind-the-scenes detail about the set itself, which actually enhances the film's claustrophobic feel.
You're talking about the library.
The library. The actual library at Maine North High was deemed too small for the complex camera movements and the lighting they needed for filming.
So they couldn't just use the space as it was. They had to build a new one.
Exactly. What the crew did was construct a virtually identical but significantly larger library set right inside the school's gymnasium.
That's a fascinating detail.
It is, because while it looks like a real kind of rundown institutional library, the space itself was manufactured and controlled. This commitment to maintaining the illusion, despite needing more space, it just reinforces the film's reliance on that single central environment where the characters literally have nowhere to escape to.
They're sealed off from the outside world inside this custom-built bubble.
The casting process for this film is legendary, mostly because it codified the Brat Pack. It's hard to even imagine the film without those 5 specific faces, but the reality is that several key roles involved significant shifts in drama that profoundly influenced the final film.
Yeah, that term Brat Pack, it was attached by the media afterward, particularly a New York Magazine profile. It stuck to the 5 main actors: Emilio Estevez, Anthony Michael Hall, Judd Nelson, Molly Ringwald, and Ali Sheedy.
And that ensemble, they just came to define an era of youthful Hollywood talent. They became intrinsically linked to Hughes's work, embodying the cinematic teenager of the 1980s.
Let's start with the immediate connections. Anthony Michael Hall and Molly Ringwald were already, Hughes alumni from 16 Candles.
Right.
Hall was the very first one officially cast as Brian Johnson, the Brain. So he provided this baseline of familiarity and comfort for the director.
And Ringwald's involvement was a bit more complicated, which is fascinating because it shows her early influence on the project.
It really does. She was originally approached to play Allison Reynolds, the basket case, and in the first draft, that character was named Kathy.
Then she wasn't happy about that.
No, the source material says she was really upset because she intensely wanted the role of Claire Standish, the princess, and she managed to convince Hughes and the studio to give her Claire's part.
That's a massive shift in the film's entire dynamic. If Molly Ringwald, who had this effortless, accessible glamour, if she had been playing the silent, gothic basket case, the character of the princess would have been completely different.
Completely. Her successful lobbying to play Claire anchored that role with a certain vulnerability that might have been absent otherwise. And this, of course, opened the door for Ali Sheedy to step into the role of Allison.
And Sheedy beat out some serious competition for that part.
Oh, yeah. The auditions for the female roles were highly competitive. For the roles that Sheedy and Ringwald eventually got, Hughes considered actors like Robin Wright, Jodie Foster, Diane Lane, and Laura Dern.
Wow.
The sheer caliber of the talent they considered just shows how much expectation there was for this project, even with its small budget. They knew they were hunting for performers who could carry an hour and a half of intense dialogue.
And the casting for John Bender, the criminal, that provided the most on-set tension, didn't it?
It did. Emilio Estevez was originally slotted to play Bender, who is really the pivotal antagonist of the group.
He was, but this is a classic Hollywood moment of shifting roles to fit the talent. Hughes faced this unexpected challenge. He couldn't find the right actor for Andrew Clark, the athlete.
Right. He needed someone who could embody that sort of pressurized jock physicality, but also have an internal softness.
And when Hughes couldn't find anyone suitable, Estevez was recast as Andrew. He traded the rebel's leather jacket for the athlete's letterman.
So the search for Bender began all over again. Nicolas Cage was considered, and Alan Ruck, who later famously worked with Hughes on Ferris Bueller's Day Off, he auditioned. But the final choice came down to 2 actors.
John Cusack and Judd Nelson.
Exactly. And Hughes originally cast Cusack. But this decision was very quickly reversed. He replaced him with Nelson right before shooting started because he felt Cusack did not look intimidating enough.
And given Bender's central, aggressive role in challenging Vice Principal Vernon and pushing the group's boundaries, that need for palpable intimidation, a genuine sense of threat, was crucial to the film's psychological engine.
And Nelson's commitment to embodying that intimidation, well, it nearly cost him the role.
Right, he stayed in character.
Right. He did. According to the sources, he harassed Ringwald off camera, maintaining Bender's aggressive, mocking persona, even when the cameras weren't rolling.
That blurring of the line between actor and character created genuine friction behind the scenes. Hughes was reportedly so disappointed in Nelson's actions that he nearly fired him.
Which is a critical moment. Losing Nelson would have fundamentally altered the film.
It took intervention from the other actors to convince Hughes to keep him in the role.
It really highlights the complexity of working with method acting techniques in that kind of high-pressure, dialogue-driven environment. Nelson's intensity was exactly what Hughes wanted on screen, but it created a hostile working environment off-screen.
And finally, we can't forget the casting of the janitor, Carl Reed. He's this unlikely voice of adult perspective, challenging Vernon's arrogance.
And Rick Moranis was the initial pick for that role.
Which would have been a very different character.
Very different. Moranis was cast, but the film's producer, Ned Tannen, released him. The reason given was that Moranis' portrayal, described as an over-the-top Russian caricature, it just didn't align with the serious, realistic tone Hughes was trying to achieve.
They needed someone humble but insightful, not comic relief.
Precisely. Moranis was replaced by John Capellos, who gave the janitor a more grounded, philosophical, almost omnipresent feel. And that decision really reinforced the film's thematic commitment to realism over caricature.
So moving from the mechanics of production to the meat of the film, the dialogue, the psychological concepts, this is where the film's status as a cultural document really solidifies. The detention setting, it's not just a punishment, it becomes a forced psychological encounter group.
The sources are very clear on the main theme, which is why the film resonates so deeply across generations. It's centered on the constant struggle of the American teenager to be understood, both by adults and by themselves.
That universal conflict is what makes it timeless. The specifics of 1985 might age, but that feeling of being misunderstood, that doesn't.
Not at all. Yeah. And they aren't just 5 arbitrary high school archetypes. They are 5 distinct manifestations of external pressure. They bond not over shared hobbies, but over a common disdain for the lofty expectations of their parents, teachers, and other authority figures.
And the burden of peer pressure to maintain a certain image.
Right. And to really understand the thematic depth, you have to look at why they are in attention. That's central to the film's point about surface versus reality. The film strips away the facade of the stereotype, the princess, the jock, to reveal the underlying vulnerability.
Their detention offense is just the symptom. Their home life is the disease.
Exactly. Let's really break down those pressures, because they are deeply rooted. Take Claire, the princess. She seems entirely self-absorbed, but she is drowning in intense peer pressure to maintain her social status.
But the real turmoil is at home.
It is. Her bickering parents are using her against each other in their divorce. She skips school to go shopping, which is presented as this minor offense, but it's masking major domestic strain and emotional manipulation.
And then there's John Bender, the criminal. The film takes great pains to make sure we understand his aggression is not inherent.
No, he is explicitly a victim of physical abuse. He reveals to the group the abuse he and his mother suffer from his father, specifically citing cigar burns and other injuries.
That's awful.
It is. And we have to view his rebellious, aggressive behavior, his constant need to challenge authority, and his mockery of others not as innate delinquency, but as a defense mechanism. It's a way to project strength and deflect from his trauma.
And Andrew Clark, the athlete, he seems to have it all. Status, physical prowess, but he's shown to be terrified of his father.
A man who lives vicariously through his son's wrestling success. Andrew feels intimidated by his father to succeed, and he felt compelled to engage in that cruel, senseless act.
Taping the students' buttocks together.
In a bid to win his teammates and his father's approval. His detention is a direct consequence of trying to meet this impossible, almost violent standard of masculine aggression.
And Brian Johnson, the brain, who seems the most compliant, the least likely to be in trouble, he carries the heaviest academic burden.
His anxiety over grades was so extreme that he contemplated suicide after getting an F in shop class. His detention for bringing a flare gun to school was a direct, dangerous, and desperate cry for help.
The flare gun wasn't meant as a weapon against others.
No, but as a tool for self-harm or a desperate signal stemming from this overwhelming parental pressure to be perfect.
Even Allison Reynolds, the basket case, who just showed up to detention because she had nothing better to do, she is revealed to be grappling with profound parental neglect.
She admits to being a compulsive liar and stealing things, preparing to run away from a home where her parents are physically present but entirely neglectful of her emotional needs. She is so starved for attention and validation.
That she just tries to invent a life to see if anyone will engage with it.
The thematic genius of Hughes here is the realization that despite the vast differences in their social groups, the jock never speaks to the brain, the princess ignores the criminal, they all face similar internal struggles.
Related to expectations and authenticity.
Yes. By breaking down these obvious stereotypes, the characters are forced to discover that they are more similar than different. They empathize with each other's struggles once the social mask is removed, and that shared vulnerability is the whole point.
The only adult figure who is consistently present, Vice Principal Richard Vernon, is deliberately written to embody that institutional, unsympathetic pressure they're all struggling against.
Oh, absolutely. He's the physical manifestation of the system that pigeonholes them. Mr. Vernon is portrayed with, arguably, no redeeming qualities.
He constantly talks down to the students, calls them potential failures, uses intimidation. We see him accessing private student information and just forcefully flaunting his authority at every turn.
His interactions with them just reinforce the idea that the adult world often refuses to truly see or hear the adolescent experience. It prefers to label and manage them.
And the antagonism between Vernon and Bender is so central to this theme. Vernon continually and aggressively challenges Bender, trying to provoke him into a confrontation that would justify more punishment.
And Bender, crucially, is the only one in the group who chooses to stand up to him. He provides that defiant backbone for the whole group. Vernon is trying to break Bender, and Bender is refusing to be broken.
Which elevates the conflict beyond just a simple student-teacher disagreement.
And the script gives us a fascinating counterpoint to Vernon, which prevents the adult world from being painted as, entirely monolithic.
Carl the janitor.
Carl Reed. We see Vernon's own internal struggles revealed through his conversation with Carl. Vernon complains that students have become less disciplined, more arrogant, lamenting how the younger generation has changed.
But Carl, the figure who literally cleans up the school's mess, offers this unexpected critique. He suggests that Vernon is the one who has changed.
He challenges the adult authority figure, asserting that Vernon cares too much about what the students think of him. The janitor, often invisible, becomes the film's unexpected moral compass.
Suggesting that Vernon's arrogance and frustration are rooted in his own anxieties and his own failed expectations.
Carl offers a much more nuanced view. He tells Vernon that the students are still the same, but Vernon is the one who has lost perspective. It's a moment that forces you to question the adult power structure, not just through the eyes of the students, but through the eyes of another working adult.
Someone who is maybe closer to the truth of the institution than the administration is.
I think so.
When the film was released, it landed squarely in the teen film genre, but critics immediately noted that its structure was unusual for the time. It's essentially a chamber drama, a play filmed mostly in one room.
Right, and the source is compared to films like The Big Chill or My Dinner with Andre.
Because of its confessional formula.
Exactly. This formula dictates that a disparate group is forced together in a confined space, and through forced proximity and dialogue, they have to reveal their inner truths. Gene Siskel was particularly delighted that the film resisted breaking out of its claustrophobic set for what he called typical teenage movie sex or violence.
It was a deliberate, refreshing choice to keep the tension entirely conversational and psychological.
Focusing on emotional intimacy rather than spectacle. And that focus on performance and dialogue really paid off with the major critics. Roger Ebert, for example, called the performances wonderful.
He praised the film's surprisingly good ear for the way they speak.
He did. He noted that while the film was, more or less predictable in its structure, it didn't rely on earth-shaking revelations, but rather on the simple, powerful growth of the students' willingness to genuinely talk to one another.
But not all critics agreed that the emotional honesty was genuine.
No. Janet Maslin of the New York Times was highly skeptical. She felt the candor was fraudulent.
Fraudulent, that's a strong word.
It is. She felt that Hughes should have simply flung them together without forcing the encounter group element that structured the major revelations. She argued that the young stars would have mixed well even without that contrived psychological pressure to confess their deepest fears.
So there was a divide. Some saw an honest portrayal of teen angst, while others saw a formulaic, manufactured approach to emotional intimacy.
Like a setup designed to elicit tears on cue. Retrospectively, however, the assessment has been highly positive, often forgiving the formula for the sincere results it produced.
Right.
James Berardinelli wrote in 1998 that few would call it a great film in the classical sense, but it has a candor that is unexpected and refreshing in a sea of too often generic teen-themed films. It elevated the genre by focusing on dialogue rather than spectacle.
Forcing audiences to take adolescent internal struggles seriously. And we also have a very specific political interpretation from P.J. O'Rourke, which shows the film's unexpected philosophical versatility.
O'Rourke called it Hughes's masterwork, and he viewed the film not as a social critique of class, but as a celebration of individualism against institutional tyranny.
How so?
He noted that the students present themselves, like good conservatives do, as individuals, and they don't organize a collective protest against authority.
And that's where the goofing off element comes in.
Exactly. O'Rourke valued their emphasis on goofing off, the spontaneous rebellion, exploring the building, the smoking, which he related directly to individual liberty. In his view, the students' rebellion wasn't political. It was a nonconformist, personal declaration of freedom against the repressive institution.
Which just highlights the film's capacity to be interpreted across different ideological lines, proving its complexity.
Definitely.
30-plus years later, this film is far more than a cultural touchstone. It is the dictionary definition of the 1980s teen film, influencing everything from music videos to ensemble dramas that followed.
It's rightly been called the quintessential 1980s film. Its legacy is cemented by its high rankings on all these retrospective lists. Empire Magazine, The New York Times, Entertainment Weekly, it's a foundational text for the genre.
Because it showed that intellectual and emotional honesty could translate into box office success.
And the power of the film extends beyond the screen itself into its marketing. We have to talk about that iconic poster.
Photographed by Annie Leibovitz.
Yes, toward the end of shooting. And the image itself just captured the mood of the film perfectly.
That image, the five of them huddled together, slightly defiant, gazing at the camera with Bender's fist in the air, it was groundbreaking.
It was. It was so influential that the sources note it changed how teen films were marketed from that point on. It favored a serious ensemble-focused pose that emphasized group tension and character, rather than just romantic pairings or action shots.
And the caption beneath that image slightly redefined the categories, presenting them as a brain, a beauty, a jock, a rebel, and a recluse.
Which quickly became the accepted shorthand. It perfectly crystallized the film's concept into a visual that was immediately copied.
It was famously satirized in the poster for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, too.
It was. And even recently, in the world of manga, the poster inspired the title page of a chapter of the series Akane Banashi. The simple arrangement of those five figures standing up against the world is a design template that carries instant meaning.
The influence is so wide-ranging that it even inspires comparisons to films of, well, monumental status, which brings us back to that critical assessment that demands some explanation.
Scholar Bjorn Sonnenberg shrank. He didn't mince words when assessing its position in the canon. He called The Breakfast Club the Citizen Kane of the teen film genre.
That's a powerful comparison. We need to unpack that. What makes it the Citizen Kane of the genre?
Well, Citizen Kane is often cited not just for its quality, but because it radically broke the mold of storytelling in its time. Similarly, The Breakfast Club established a new narrative grammar for the modern adolescent film.
It proved that minimal setting, character-driven trauma, and intense dialogue could sustain a major future.
And that fundamentally shifted the perception of the genre from disposable entertainment to something capable of serious psychological depth. We even see this influence today. Sebastian Stan described the upcoming Marvel film Thunderbolts as Marvel's The Breakfast Club.
Which indicates that the concept of disparate, damaged individuals forced together for high-stakes introspection is a story engine that just never runs out of fuel.
Never.
The film's relevance is also constantly refreshed through these major anniversary celebrations and tributes, showing its continuing box office life and cultural importance.
For its 30th anniversary in 2015, the film was digitally remastered and rescreened in 430 theaters across the U.S.
That's significant for a 30-year-old film. It shows there's still a commercial appetite to experience that moment of cinematic history on the big screen.
And back in 2005, for the 20th anniversary, the film received the Silver Bucket of Excellence Award at the MTV Movie Awards,
cementing its status within the youth culture it documented.
That MTV event was a major moment. Molly Ringwald, Ali Sheedy and Anthony Michael Hall appeared together on stage. Paul Gleason, who played Vice Principal Vernon, he gave the award to his former castmates.
Which is an interesting choice, having the antagonist honor the heroes.
It was. Notably, Emilio Estevez couldn't attend, and Judd Nelson appeared earlier but left before the on-stage reunion, prompting Hall to joke about their absence.
And then, following the death of John Hughes in 2009, the cast played a central role in honoring his legacy. It became clear that they were the family of actors he was most associated with.
Right. At the 82nd Academy Awards in 2010, Sheedy, Hall, Ringwald, and Nelson all appeared in a tribute to Hughes, alongside actors from his other films like Matthew Broderick. Their presence just underscored the fact that they were the core ensemble of his most definitive work.
And here's where it gets really interesting and current. The most recent reunion, proving the enduring pull of the film 40 years later.
Yes. In April 2025, 4 decades after the film's release, all 5 principal stars,
Yes.
the entire group reunited in Chicago for a panel discussion.
The entire group.
The sources highlight that this marked the first time the entire cast had been together in 4 decades. This wasn't just a simple appearance, it was a major cultural event.
Despite its status as a classic, or maybe because of its status, the film has faced critical reassessment in recent years, prompting important cultural conversations about how we view films made in different eras.
Especially regarding power dynamics and gender issues.
And the most prominent example is Molly Ringwald's 2018 New Yorker article.
Yes, that essay focused on her critique of Hughes's films in the age of the modern accountability movement. It was not just a nostalgic look back, but a serious cultural and moral inventory of how the film's dynamics read differently today.
Her essay began with a very personal and compelling discussion. She was trying to contextualize the film for her 10-year-old daughter. She was essentially asking herself, how do I explain this culture to a child who grew up with different norms?
The source material specifically points out that she discussed explaining to her daughter the scene where her character, Claire, seems to be sexually assaulted under a desk by Bender.
Right.
Ringwald was highlighting moments within the film that, in the context of the 1980s, were often treated as edgy or rebellious, but are viewed much more critically today as potentially problematic representations of power, consent, and sexual objectification.
That kind of reassessment, especially coming from a star of the film, it often generates friction because it challenges the nostalgia many people hold for the movie.
It did. The essay provoked some criticism from those who felt she was unfairly criticizing the director who made her famous.
Applying modern standards to a historical work.
Exactly. However, the sources also note that her work was defended by others as a tender, fair-minded piece that revisited the work through a contemporary lens. And the essential point is that this discussion is evidence that The Breakfast Club isn't a static piece of history.
It's a living document.
It's a living document that continues to generate conversation about social norms and accountability, which is the mark of true cultural significance.
It seems the film's biggest strength, its ability to portray raw adolescent honesty, is also its point of vulnerability when viewed through a modern lens that demands greater awareness of systemic issues.
That's a great way to put it. The film forces us to confront how much the social dialogue around gender and acceptable behavior has changed in 4 decades. We watch the film now, and we're not only judging the characters, but implicitly judging the culture that produced them.
And the fact that we can still have that complex conversation proves the film's enduring relevance.
I think so.
You cannot talk about this film without talking about the music. It gave us one of the definitive 1980s anthems. A song so successful it arguably eclipsed the rest of the soundtrack.
It became synonymous with that feeling of adolescent defiance.
Absolutely.
The film's soundtrack was released shortly after the film in February 1985. It was produced by Keith Forsey, and the album itself peaked at number 17 on the U.S. Billboard 200, which is a respectable showing.
But the undisputed centerpiece, the song played in the opening and closing credits, is Don't You Forget About Me, performed by the Scottish rock band Simple Minds.
And that track reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. It's impossible to separate the film's climax Bender raising his fist from that song.
It's just fused together.
What's truly remarkable, though, and a classic example of creative resistance, is that Simple Minds initially did not want to record the song.
Really?
They were reluctant to associate themselves with a film soundtrack. They feared it would dilute their credibility as a serious rock band. The song was written specifically for the film by Keith Forsey and Steve Schiff.
Imagine that conversation. Resisting the opportunity to record a track that will become arguably their most famous song globally.
It just demonstrates how sometimes artists resist the very works that define their global legacy, only to have them take on a life of their own.
Fortunately for all involved, that decision was reversed.
And the song became a global phenomenon, defining the sound of the era and the emotional resonance of the film.
The rest of the album is filled out by other rock and new wave acts, plus some instrumental tracks by the producer Keith Forsey. Wang Chung's Fire in the Twilight was also featured.
And it reached number 110 on the Billboard Hot 100, providing another burst of that high-energy 80s sound.
But the critical reception to the soundtrack album as a whole was, well, pretty polarized.
It was, precisely because it was so heavily dominated by that one major hit. Music critic Robert Christgau gave the album a very low grade, a D, in 1985. He called the other songs, apart from the Simple Minds track, utterly negligible.
He even commended Simple Minds for trying to distance themselves from what became their massive hit, suggesting the rest of the material felt manufactured.
And even in retrospective looks, the consensus seems to hold that the album is largely defined by that one song.
Proving its overwhelming cultural power.
Yes. In a retrospective review, AllMusic acknowledged the Simple Minds song as the undisputed masterpiece, but felt the rest of the album was largely disposable, marred by forgettable instrumentals and other 80s artifacts.
It just highlights how a single piece of music can become so intertwined with a film that it carries the entire soundtrack's cultural weight.
Becoming inseparable from the film's ending moment of triumph and defiance.
The sources reveal that Hughes envisioned a future for these characters, a continuation of their story, though it was never realized. It makes you wonder what their adult lives would have looked like.
That's right. He had considered a sequel. It would focus on the teens reuniting years later, perhaps while serving detention in university, or a similar kind of forced academic gathering.
It's an intriguing concept, imagining these characters interacting after they've supposedly grown into stable adult lives. Will they even acknowledge each other?
And the planned irony was central to this concept, wasn't it? The idea that the self-discovery of that Saturday detention would ultimately prove fleeting.
It was intended to show them as the polar opposite of how they were in the first film.
Suggesting, perhaps, that the radical self-discovery and the promise they made to change who they were, that it ultimately failed to prevent them from conforming to new stereotypes or pressures in adulthood.
They would have reverted to form or perhaps become their parents.
That would have been a fascinating and maybe cynical commentary on the nature of growth and the difficulty of escaping social labels. It suggests that high school stereotypes just evolve into adult archetypes.
The successful lawyer, the overworked academic, the unhappy suburbanite.
Unfortunately, Hughes died before the film was ever made, leaving that hypothetical future open to our imagination.
But the concept still echoes today, demonstrating its enduring narrative framework.
Absolutely. The structure is so resonant that, as we mentioned earlier, modern filmmakers and actors continue to reference it as a template for ensemble dynamics.
So after analyzing the history, the high-stakes casting drama, the critical divisions, and the legacy of cultural reassessment, what is the central learning? What made this low-budget film a permanent fixture in our collective memory?
I think the central learning is that the film's enduring power lies not in the actual events of the Saturday detention, but in its ability to strip away surfaces and force a raw, genuine conversation about social rigidity and the universal anxiety of being profoundly misunderstood.
That struggle, the fear of not being seen for who you truly are, whether by parents, peers, or institutions, that remains relevant across generations, regardless of the year they enter high school.
The combination of minimal setting, maximum dialogue, and the intense focus on character rather than action allowed a $1 million film to become a cultural benchmark. It defined the teen film genre for a decade.
Proving that complex emotional honesty could be highly profitable and resonant, it was the script and the ensemble's performances that truly carried the weight.
The commitment to the psychological encounter, driven by an exceptional and ultimately unified cast, allowed those core themes of parental pressure and peer expectations to be delivered with force and sincerity. It was an incredibly efficient piece of filmmaking that achieved a huge emotional scope by limiting its physical one.
It demonstrates that sometimes the greatest dramatic tension comes not from where you go, but from who you're forced to sit next to.
Exactly.
We know from the source material that the film's first print was 150 minutes long, far exceeding the 97-minute theatrical release.
A huge gap.
The Criterion Collection, in its 2018 release, included 50 minutes of new, deleted, and extended scenes, and Ali Sheedy even revealed that a full director's cut existed, although Hughes' widow has not disclosed its whereabouts.
That's a massive difference between 150 minutes and 97. Those 53 minutes could contain critical character development.
So here is the thought for you to consider. What crucial moments or deeper character insights might exist within those 53 minutes of potentially deleted footage? How would a longer, slower exploration of these characters, more time spent with Brian's anxiety, or deeper dives into Bender's defense mechanisms and the consequences of Vernon's aggression, how would that fundamentally change our understanding of these 5 teenagers and their struggles?
It suggests there's a much richer and maybe darker film waiting to be seen.
One that truly pushes the limits of that single Saturday. Thanks for listening.